My name is actually Adelica Hayes Franklin Acklen Cheatham. I was born here in Nashville in March of 1817. I was the oldest daughter of Oliver Bliss and Sarah Hightower Hayes. My father came in from New England. He was a lawyer, a land speculator, and a Presbyterian minister. In fact, he was one of the first ministers of the little Harpeth Presbyterian Church, which still stands just over the county line in Williamson County. We were all well educated. I graduated from the Nashville Female Academy at the age of 16. I had two sisters who lived to adulthood. They were Laura and Corinne. My brothers were Richard, Oliver Bliss Jr. and Oliver Bliss Jr., truly, Hal and Joel. Now, Oliver Bliss Jr., the first one, died as an infant, and when the next child was born, he was given that name. Shortly after I graduated, I became engaged to a young man by the name of Alfonso Gibbs, but he would die before we could marry. It was 5 years before I was even interested in having another man in my life, but I accompanied my father on a business trip to the Fairview Plantation in Gallatin, Tennessee. I wrote in his book, the guest book, that I liked his house and had set my cap for its owner. A most audacious thing for a Victorian lady to do, and my mother would have been scandalized. But ladies, it pays to advertise. And not too long after Mr. Franklin returned from his business trip, he had been away when we were there, he came calling with his hat in his hand. And it wasn't too long after that before we were married. It was a very happy marriage. It lasted 8 years. It produced 4 children, 3 daughters, and a little boy who only lived for 13 hours. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Mr. Franklin. In the first place, he was incredibly wealthy. He owned not only the Fairview Plantation, but 6 plantations in Louisiana at Angola. I think it's now a state prison. In Fairview, we raised horses, and we raised the hay and the feed for the horses. In Louisiana, we raised our cash crop, which was cotton, of course. He also owned stocks and banks, railroads. He owned undeveloped land in Texas. In short, again, he was incredibly wealthy, and I must admit that he made the bulk of his original fortune in the slave trade. But he had gotten out of the business long before he met me, and his big desire was to be considered a Southern gentleman. My father would never have allowed me to marry a slave trader. They were looked on a little less than, as I understand it, your used car salesman might be looked upon. We spent most of our summers here in Gallatin and our winters in Louisiana, for obvious reasons if you've ever tried to spend the summer in Louisiana. So we were there and back and forth. And on a business trip down to check on things in Louisiana, after 8 years of marriage, Isaac became quite ill and died very suddenly there on the plantations. I took my children, my 3 daughters, and we went by river down to Louisiana to return his body back to Gallatin. It was April, it was hot. Dr. Gee embalmed his body in 123 gallons of alcohol to make the trip back. And he was buried in the mausoleum there at the Fairview Plantation. His body has since been moved to Mount Olivet Cemetery, where the Acklen Mausoleum is. On the way back, our two oldest daughters, Victoria and Adelica, both became ill, and they died within weeks of their father. I did not feel I could remain at Fairview, so I came to Nashville and bought a home on Cherry Street with my youngest daughter, Emma. I think you now call that street 4th Avenue. With part of my inheritance from Isaac's estate, though, I also bought a parcel of land on a hill overlooking downtown Nashville, which I would eventually refer to as Belmont, beautiful mountain. After my period of mourning ended, I was invited to a ball given by Mrs. John Bell. At that ball, there was a young lawyer from Huntsville, Alabama, by the name of Joseph Alexander Smith Acklen. We were introduced. Obviously, 2 years later, we were married. But ladies, not until the gentleman signed the mother of all prenuptial agreements. Joseph had no money. He was a poor, struggling lawyer. But he had marched off to Texas with high hopes of soldiering in the Texas Revolution against Mexico. It was only by happenstance that his group was not sent to the Alamo. Following that experience, he marched home again and decided to read law. He thought it was safer than soldiering. He told one of our sons later that when Mrs. Bell offered to introduce him to me, he said, "Why, Mrs. Franklin wouldn't care a whit to dance with a common soldier when her last partner had been a general. I was dancing with General George Shields." Well, you can see how wrong you can be. We had a very happy marriage. Shortly after our marriage, we began work on the estate that would be Belmont. We moved in 1852, and we had intended for it to be just a summer home. Again, back to the summers in Louisiana. We would go there in the wintertime and come here in the summertime. But we soon found out that it would be more appropriate to turn the house into a year-round home. So if you've been to my house, you know the Grand Salon. And the Grand Salon used to be the back porch. And when we decided to make it a full-time residence, we incorporated the back porch to create the Grand Salon. The back staircase where Queen Victoria's picture stands used to be an outside staircase coming down. We also decorated it, I did, in the ultimate of Victoriana at the time. There were heavy drapes and dark wallpaper and dark furniture. There was one lady that was very influential, and she wrote an article about tripping over things in the dark. I didn't think that was very nice of her, but especially when I was really trying to impress her. But we also had on the estate, we had running water, we had gas for gasoliers, we had 2 greenhouses so that we had citrus fruit all year long. We had a small zoo on the grounds, a bear cage, bear house, birds, all sorts of things. And we used to open it on weekends for the general public to come in and enjoy the grounds, picnic, walk around, enjoy what they could see there. In 1855, our world changed dramatically as our twin daughters, Laura and Corinne, named for my sisters, became ill and with days of each other died. Later that same year, my daughter Emma Franklin also died. Joseph and I had 4 children who would live to adulthood. They were our oldest son, Joseph Jr. We called him Bud. There was William, Claude, and our daughter Pauline. In 1852, to go back a little bit, the Southern Cultivator, which was a magazine that came out at the time, did a cover story on us. And they talked about how well we treated the 750 slaves who worked our plantation in Louisiana. They were well fed, well clothed, well housed, and apparently this was worthy of note. This was very important to Joseph, as he had never grown up in an agrarian society and had very little experience with slaves or managing them. So to be commended for the way we treated them and everything like that was extremely important to him. Of course, in 1861, our world changed completely. With the beginning of the war between the states, the Civil War, the War of Northern Aggression, whatever we call it today. We heard about the fall of Fort Donelson on a Sunday morning in February of 1862. The impossible had happened. We felt relatively safe here. Fort Donelson was supposed to have the north blocked off by river from coming south. We did not count on Ulysses S. Grant. He took the fort, and the Confederates were streaming back to Nashville with the Union in hot pursuit, of course. There was even rumor that the Confederates would try to burn the town to keep the Federals from getting it. But they didn't stay here long enough. They passed through rather rapidly, and Nashville fell to the Federal forces without a shot ever being fired. We had heard what had happened in other cities that had fallen to the Federals, and it was thought that, well, for one, we had outfitted a corps of Confederate soldiers, the Acklen Rifles. Because of that, and well, because we knew that travel was going to be greatly restricted within just the next few days, it was decided that Joseph would leave that night under cover of darkness and head for Angola, Louisiana, and our plantations. I would remain at Belmont with our family. It was the last time I would see him. By summer, I was frantic with worry. I had not heard from him, and finally a letter came. Well, in August of 1863, I received this letter. It was the last time I would hear from him. It stated, Angola Plantation, August 20th, 1863, Dear Addie, I am in receipt of your letter of July the 26th. In it, you did not mention the receipt of any letters from me. I have written you 3 very recently and sent them by the river. If Marshall has got home, he will give you an account of the troubles and losses we have sustained. To be separated from you and the children for so long a time is a very great hardship, but one I could not avoid. I have nothing left now but my cotton, and it is uncertain if I shall be permitted to dispose of it. I am in constant dread of its being burned. My mules and horses have all been taken and stole by the Confederates, and my neighbors, the places are all in ruins, the crops all wasted and wasting. My only chance of support is to sell my cotton, and as soon as I can accomplish that, I shall start for Nashville. My general health is as good as usual, but my infirmity has rather increased. I am done with slave labor. I never had much fancy for it, as you know, but now I am fully satisfied I have suffered all kinds of deprivations and been subjected to all kinds of lies and slanders that malice could invent. When you write again, let me know something of home affairs. how many servants you have, and how you get along. And if Sally's with you, give my love to the children and tell little Pauline I will answer her letter. Affectionately, your husband. In September, I received word that Joseph, like Isaac before him, had died on the plantations. He died of malaria. The cotton crop that he was so concerned about was of incredible concern to all of us because this was the livelihood. This is what we lived on. And in 1861, the entire crop that year had been totally wiped out by a hurricane. This crop was the next crop. And if we could not sell it, we were practically destitute. I was $100,000 in debt. We had actually borrowed money just before the beginning of the war to build a new home on the plantations in Angola. That, of course, never came to be. Well, that being the case, I really had no time for mourning. I chartered a boat, and with my cousin Sally Carter from Franklin, you may know her, she was later Sally Galt, and my brother Joel, we set out for Louisiana. When we got there, things were pretty much like he said, except that the Confederate general in charge of the land was an old childhood friend. The Hayes and the Polks from Columbia were lifelong friends. And the general in charge was one Leonidas Polk. So I set out to find him. I wanted help. I got arrested. I didn't have one of those little pieces of paper that said I could travel, but I couldn't find Leonidas to get the passage. So, well, they didn't keep me long. But I finally found him, explained my problem to him, and he wasn't particularly impressed. Said something about he had a war to run. But after I told him that I was $100,000 in debt, and if he didn't help me, I was going to tell his friends and mine, to whom I owned the money, that I was going to take bankruptcy, and he forced me into it. That helped him to come around and see some reason. Well, then, okay, I had some Confederate soldiers who were going to help me move the cotton, but I didn't have anything else. So I kind of told some Union people that I was planning to donate the cotton to the Federals if they would help me move it. And so I got some Federal mules and buckboards, and with the Confederate soldiers, we were able to move the cotton onto a ship that went out through New Orleans, and the cotton safely arrived in Liverpool, England, where the Rothschild family sold it for $960,000. Also, you know, a little money changed hands along the way of that too, but it was worth it. Now, it was deemed too dangerous for us to try to go back up the Mississippi River the way we had come. So we came home to Nashville by way of around Florida and into New York City, and by rail and river, we were able to get back to Nashville in December of 1864. Now, if you know your history, that was just before the beginning of the Battle of Nashville. And there were Federal troops camped all over Belmont, and the house was occupied by Union officers. Talk about out of the frying pan. Well, actually, the Union officers were quite nice. We were welcome to stay in the house if we wanted to, but they strongly advised against it. Gave me permission to move anything I wanted to take out of the house, And so we removed as much as we could of the valuables. And with my 4 children, we went to the downtown home of Mrs. James K. Polk and rode out the battle there, obviously thinking that no soldier of either army would dare enter the home of a former United States president. And we were right. When the war ended, I did 2 things. The first thing I did was throw a party. We had entertained lavishly at Belmont, and I longed for the time when we could do it again. I used to plan my parties to coincide with the full moon so that as people came up the long drives, they would get the full effect of the house in the moonlight. So the first thing I did was throw a party. The next thing I did was, obviously, I booked passage for myself, my children, a tutor, and we sailed for England. I stopped long enough in Liverpool to get the money, went on to London, toured London, went on from there to Paris. In Paris, I was presented at the court of Napoleon III and Empress Eugenie. I even rode with them several times. I was quite a horsewoman. My sister once said I'd rather jump a gate than open it. Yeah. If you've ever tried to get off a side saddle, you'll understand that. But we rode with them, and when I left, they gave me several nice presents, a brooch and some other things. And then I went on to Rome. Now, if you've been at my house, you know what I did in Rome. I bought statuary, and lots of it, mostly from expatriate Americans who had been caught in Rome because of the war and could not come home. When I returned to America, I went down to the Angola plantations to visit. Many of our people had stayed after the war, and we had an old retainer that we called Uncle Phil. He had all the manners of any palace courtier, what do you call them? Courtiers? Anyway, he had all those manners, and he assumed that I had called on Queen Victoria. Well, back then, if you called on somebody and left your card, it was up to them to return the visit. So he wanted to know if I saw Queen Vicky. I said, no, she wasn't there when I was there. So he wanted to know when I thought we might expect her to return the call. And I think he had the entire event planned already, and he was extremely disappointed when I told him I really didn't think that was going to happen. When I returned to Nashville, I married again for the 3rd time, this time to Dr. William Cheatham, a noted psychiatrist of his day. Dr. Cheatham was a widower. He and his first wife had been arrested during the war as she was suspected of passing on information on troop movements to her brother-in-law, General John Hunt Morgan. On the way to a prison camp in the north, Mrs. Cheatham died. Dr. Cheatham was then released to return to Nashville and back to his psychiatric practice. He had 2 small children, and we raised them at Belmont. Dr. Cheatham was one of the people responsible. He and Dorothea Dix were responsible for the layout of Central State Psychiatric Hospital, where he was the superintendent for many years. He was actually removed from that post by the military governor during the war. In 1884, I left Belmont. I went first to Orlando, Florida, and then to Washington, D.C., where my oldest son, Joseph Jr., had been a legislator from the state of Louisiana. He had married a girl from Louisiana and had been living there. I I took with me my 3 now adult children, William, Claude, and Pauline. On a shopping trip to New York City, would we all like to do that? I became ill and died of pneumonia in a hotel there in New York City. My body was brought back to the First Downtown Presbyterian Church, where I had been a lifelong member. And if you're ever downtown and you hear the bells chime, I hope you'll think of me. I donated those bells to the church. I thank you for having me, and I'd love to try to answer any questions you might have.
Did you have other income besides the cotton money?
Well, there was the money left over from Isaac's estate, but a lot of that went into building Belmont. We sort of didn't spare any expense when we built Belmont and furnished it.
Was Dr. Cheatham related to General Benjamin Cheatham?
Brother. Yes, it was his brother. If you've got any questions about what I'm wearing or anything, I'd be glad to answer those too, or...
Well, tell us about it.
Well, okay, I'll tell you about it. I'm dressed, as far as I know, I'm a member of a reenacting group called the Lady Soldiers Friends Society. And we try to be what we consider living historians. In other words, when you look at me, you ought to see something. I'm afraid my hair's a little short, but I've got it parted down the middle. You will invariably see women with their hair parted down the middle and pulled back generally. We found, you know, back then the carte de visites were becoming very popular. The little cardboard cards that people traded, like we used to do school pictures. And there's this picture of this woman, and she has to be 70 years old, and she's got corkscrews coming down, and she's sitting there like this. Probably not her best shot. But so basically you will find the women had their hair back. And women, I hate to put it this way, but there's only one way to put it. Married women and women of a certain age would be dressed in one color. The dress and the skirt would match. If you go to some of these reenactments, you'll see people with a skirt and a blouse on, and they call it Civil War period. Well, it's not. Young girls excuse me, my nose is, young girls used to wear what became very popular was zouave jackets. They had white blouses with huge sleeves and a vest, and then usually maybe a plaid or a dark skirt. That was for young girls, like many skirts are. You know, there has always been appropriate dress for your age. And I have this, this story. I was at a conference one time and was talking about this dress, and it's made of raw silk. And one of the women there, who's been reenacting much longer than any of the rest of us, she said, well, you know, that was just considered tissue. It was not considered good material. And I told her, honey, I just have to take whatever my daddy can get from the blockade runner. Give me a break. But, okay, my dress. Now, having said that, okay, we're filming this for posterity too. Okay, I have on my bloomers, I have on my hose, my boots are reproductions, I have on a modesty petticoat, and I have on my hoop, and then my skirts over it. I probably should have a hoop cover on, but I don't think you can see you never wanted to see a lady's hoop bands. You never wanted to see that. I've also got on a corset. That's one reason I was almost late today.
How about plaid? Was plaid popular in Gallatin?
Plaid was popular everywhere. It's been popular since.
Or did it connect to the old country? Did you wear a certain kind of plaid, like?
No, that I do that at home.
So, Ms. Cheatham, you would represent someone of high social strata
Yes.
as far as what you wore.
Yes.
So this would be the top of the Victorian style.
This would be good style. This is everyday style. This would not be a dinner dress. This would be a tea dress maybe. This is not the height of fashion, but this is a good dress. You would wear it to go calling. A lady always carried her reticule, not her purse. It usually contained needlework or handwork that she could do, and then you'd go calling. People had calling hours, and your friends knew that. You were at home on Monday afternoons from 2 to 4, and your best friend was at home Tuesdays from 2 to 4, or something like that. So you would make your calls then. But you'd take something to do as you sat and chatted. And so a lady carried her reticule with her needlework in it.
Did Adelica, did she play, or did she play the piano? Or
Adelica played the piano beautifully. We even at Belmont have a lot of her own sheet music. Yes, she was accomplished at many things, but yes, she was an accomplished pianist, horsewoman. She really was an accomplished horsewoman and loved to ride. And according to one of her sisters, she had the gift of gab. She said Adelica could talk the birds out of the trees. Must have been the way she got Leonidas Polk to cooperate with her. But
How about that sculpture at your mausoleum in
Perry?
How about that sculpture? Tell us about that.
Perry represents the fallen angel from Sir Thomas More's work. Perry, and she has been there's a lot of rumors that go around about what Perry's holding. But in her hand, she has the cup of redemption, and in this hand is the tears of the penitent sinner. It's not poison, it's not pills or anything like that. It's nothing that dramatic. But yes, Perry was one of the ones that she brought back from Rome, had shipped back from Rome. There's a great story about one of her, a couple of her artifacts, if I've got time to tell them. Mark Brown was telling me about, they'd been trying to get Adelica's possessions back in the house, and she had well, it's still there now, what's there now, but she had a statue that had a hand up, and a finger was broken on it. Well, one of the men that worked with Belmont was out one day, and he called Mark and he said, "I have found a statue like the one that Adelica had." And Mark says, "That's wonderful. Can you buy it? You know, can we afford to buy it?" And he says, "Well, there's one thing wrong with it. It has a broken finger." And Mark said, he went kind of cold all over and said, "That would be Adelica's statue. Please try to get it." And there is now a picture of Isaac Franklin that hangs in the dining room. They knew of 3 pictures of Isaac that existed. And Mark and his mother were, I believe in Huntsville, he said, antiquing one day. And he said he came around a corner and he was face to face with Isaac Franklin. And he said his mother came up by him and said, "Son, what's wrong? You're so pale." And he said, "That's Isaac Franklin." So he called and got permission. They said, "Yes, buy it," whatever, you know. So he said he got real casual then, and he kind of sauntered up to the desk and told the lady at the cash register that, "I kind of got attached to that old man back there. Do you know anything about him or how much she wants for him?" And she came in yesterday. He said, well, you know, he said, let me call her. So they called, made a deal, said Isaac Franklin went home in the back seat with a seatbelt over him. So things like that are beginning to come back to the mansion. And if you haven't been there lately, I was just there a couple of weeks ago, and Adelicia's bedroom, as they're calling it, is really coming along. That's going to be restored and open very, very soon. So you need to go and see it. If you've been there before, go back. There's something new turning up there every day.
How long was she there? How long did she actually live at Belmont, approximately?
From about 30 years, a little over 30 years, 52 to 80.
So it really was home.
Oh yes, she built it, yes. They had was it the bowling alley? Yeah, I think. Joseph had a bowling alley put in, and she never liked it, and as soon as he died, she tore it down. So.
About the war years, were there any battles there? I understand there wasn't any fighting on the property.
Oh yeah, it was kind of very close to the epicenter of the Battle of Nashville. When she got back to the house, she was very gratified to find out that not much damage had been done to the house, but most of her wooden outbuildings were destroyed. Fences were taken down. She actually sued the federal government for her losses during the war. She didn't live to collect it, but Joseph Jr. did. He got $2,100 to cover damages to Belmont during the Battle of Nashville. But it was interesting to find out that she thought that the federal officers were very nice and allowed her to remove things, they didn't pilfer through things, and they just used it as their headquarters. So.
And she lived with Mrs. Polk for the remainder of the war?
No, just until the battle was over. It's 2 days battle. They stayed down there and took a lot of her good stuff down there too. Got it out of the house, I guess, just in case the tide turned the wrong way for the Federals. But it was quite a place, and she did love to entertain. If you've read the book Dinner at Belmont, forget it. There's a new book out, and I'm sorry I can't remember the name of it now, but it's in the gift shop there. It's in my bookcase ready to be read.
She entertained before and after, during the war? Did she entertain?
Not much, no. People were too busy. She was. Too much was going on.
And then after the war, it picked back up?
Yes. In fact, she was married at Belmont. She and Dr. Cheatham married at Belmont. And there was an article in the paper. The Napoleon III apparently sent her either a belt or a tiara, but anyway, she had a bunch of jewels, and he had given her some, and she had the belt on, and the newspaper reporter wrote in the paper that it was something to the effect of, it was difficult to tell if the bride's legendary beauty had dimmed through the years as one was blinded by the number of diamonds she was wearing. Doesn't sound like much of a compliment to me. But apparently she married Dr. Cheatham, and Dr. Cheatham did not go to Washington with her. They never divorced, but he remained in Nashville, and he was in medical practice by that time with his son. And so he stayed in Nashville, when she left.
So she didn't really, after that last trip, she didn't really return. She stayed in Washington or New York.
Right. Well, nobody knows if she was planning to return at all or not. Joseph Jr. lived in the house for a while. His wife died, I think, in childbirth. And he lived at the house for a while. And Dr. Cheatham, the last we heard from, I think the last report from him was he was living either in a hotel or at his club, they called it. So he had gone to Washington once or twice with her. He'd made some trips with her, but don't know. Anybody else got any questions? Thank you.